Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Lasaniziris, and this is my YouTube channel, grecochess. We continue now with the series of presenting games suggested to me by my Facebook friends. In this video, it's the turn of the Israeli Grandmaster Maxim Rodhstein, who is my Facebook friend, and he suggested that I present a game that he played this March, that is March 2025, in Eforie, Romania, against Vasil Ivanchuk for the European Championship, where Maxim got third place in the end. When they played, and the rating should be more or less the same by now because the same year, Maxim's rating was 26-23, Vasil's was 26-04, so Maxim just had 19 points higher rating, which means almost nothing. Ivanchuk, by the way, is very famous because he's one of the oldest still active chess players. He's very strong, he's done very well in recent tournaments. And in addition, he has a monthly column at the chess magazine, the French language chess magazine, Europe Échec, the imagination of in chess, where he selects games that are superb and he analyzes them very extensively. And let's go now to the chessport of chess.com to present the game. And here we are. We're not here. Here we are. The previous screen is when you want to start your own game. And as we usually do, on the left half, you're going to see here the chessboard. And on the right half, below the word analysis or next to word analysis, you're going to see the computer evaluation in the form of a number. Positive number means white is doing better. Negative means that black is doing better. 1.0 means that the difference is as if this side that's doing better has an extra pawn. Of course, the computer does not only count material balance, but many other factors. That is why the material balance and the computer evaluation may differ. Computer will tell us what do they think about this move, and if it was the best, if not, which move would have been the best, and what are the best 5 options for the other player whose turn is to come. And we start the game with Maxim. Maxim has the white pieces, by the way, and Vasil has the black. Pawn goes to d4, and you're going to see here the names of the openings. Until now, we have the queen's pawn opening, one of the most popular moves for white. Pawn to e4 is perhaps the most popular, with pawn to d4 being the second one. And knight to h6 for Vasil. When you start with d4, black usually either sends his pawn to d5 or the knight to f6, and this is called the Indian game, named after the very old times when chess had different rules in India, and they would play this move because for their rules this was a must. Pawn to c4 for white. When you start with a pawn to d4, usually the second move that you play, the most popular, is pawn to c4, unless you want to surprise your opponent. There are other choices, but the most popular second move after d4 is c4. Pawn to e6 for Vasil, second move, and now we change the name. We have it the Indian game, East Indian defense, a variation of the Indian game. Third move, pawn to g3 for Maxim, and now we have the Catalan opening. Catalan, by the way, is a province of Spain that perhaps would like to become independent, but Catalan opening has very little to do with Spanish politics, and it's just a way of opening the game when you want to place your bishop on g2 to control the long diagonal from h1 to a8. Black better be careful after that because the rook at a8 may be lost if you're not careful. And of course, advanced players are careful. They would rarely commit these mistakes, but this constrains them. There are moves that otherwise they could play, but now they can't. Pawn to d5 for Vasil. Bishop to g2 for Maxim. And now we have the Catalan opening closed. Right, because the pawn by going to d5 closed the diagonal. Bishop to e7 for Vasil. Knight to e3 for Maxim. A kingside castling for Vasil. We completed the first five moves. All of them are book moves. 0.34 advantage for white, a small one just because they started first. Let's continue the coverage. Knight to c3 for Maxim. And knight from b8 to d7 for Vasil. Queen to d3 for Maxim. And you see now that until the sixth move of black, we had book move. But now white deviates from theory. Book moves, it means that they have been extensively analyzed in the opening theory, and quite often volumes of books have been written about a particular opening. Many players try to learn them, memorize them. At the very high level where you have fixed every other aspect of your game, that is great. If you're at the low level where you blunder one piece after another, memorizing opening moves really doesn't help. And now Vasil places his pawn to c6. Why does he do it? First of all, to provide extra protection to d5 pawn, but most of all, to close the diagonal from h1 to a8. If the pawns were exchanged to c4, then the b7 pawn is protected only by the bishop. And if black is not careful, the rook on a8 is lost. Kingside castling for Maxim. And pawn goes to b6 for Vasil. We're returning now to theory, book moves, and this position, although it might most likely it has been reached from a different order of moves, it's called the Catalan opening closed Botvinnik variation. Botvinnik was one of the Soviet world champions that emerged after the Second World War and after the death of Alyakhin. He retained his title for quite a lot of years, but he lost it twice and was able to regain it. If I'm correct, he lost it from Vasily Smyslov and Michael Tal. And his name is given in this variation. But let's continue now. For one brief moment, we are back in theory, but now Maxim will place his pawn on b3, what the computer suggested before, but now we're not in theory any longer. It's an excellent move, but computer would rather have the rook go to d1. Pawn to a5 for Vasil, starting an attack along the queen's file. And also, with these moves, the bishop on c8, meaning bishop with the pawn to b6 and pawn to a5, the bishop on c8 now has more scope than before. Before it was completely blocked. Pawn to e4 for Maxim, and bishop to a6 for Vasil. That by doing so, he is pinning the pawn on c4. If Maxim by any chance moves his pawn either to c5 or takes on d5, then Maxim's queen on d3 is lost and basically Vasil has won the game. Of course, Maxim is not going to do it, but this adds one more constraint to his choices. We completed the first 10 moves. White is ahead by 0.76, a little bit more than before. Still, the game has not been yet decided. The players are trying to control as much of the center as possible and try to get the initiative, and let's see what's going to happen. Pawn to e5 for Maxim, attacking the knight of f8. And by doing so, the pawn on h7 is protected only by the king and not by the knight. Once the knight moves, and the knight, where can it go? If he goes to h5, pawn to g4, the knight is lost, there's nowhere to go. If it goes to g4, it can only safely go back to h6, where the bishop will exchange it, but after the g7 pawn takes on h6, the black king is in a very precarious situation. The g file is completely open, waiting for white to attack. That is why Vasil will send his knight back to e8. Pawn to a4 for Maxim that wants to gain more space along the queen side. And knight to c7, of course, Vasil doesn't want to leave his knight on the last rank for too long. It's only temporary because he had no better place to go. Rook to d1, the move that before was suggested. Now Maxim plays his rook and has rook and queen on the same d file. Computer thinks it's the best. And pawn to h6 for Vasil. Since there is no knight on f6 to control the h7 square, and since only the king can control it with the queen on d3, Vasil would rather have a pawn move to h6. He doesn't want to have any knight go to g5. Now, of course, it cannot go because of the bishop e7, queen d8. He doesn't want in the future Maxim to have this option or anything else, or may even threatening checkmate or a dangerous attack on h7. I said that I was thinking about the bishop on g2. Well, it needs a few steps to go to c2, but even then the h6 will not stop it, but at least will stop the option of a knight ending on g5. Where are we now? Next move, Maxim places his bishop on b2. Computer would rather have an attack starting along the h-file with pawn going to h4. Good move is b2, of course. At this point, Maxim has fianchettoed both of his bishops. Vasil places his rook on b8. By doing so, he ensures that he doesn't have to worry about white's bishop on g2. If these pawns disappear on c6 and d5, his rook is not in danger. Knight to d2 for Maxim, and pawn to I would rather have the queen go to f1, perhaps preparing. I don't know. The computer wants the queen to go to f1, bishop to b4, and then queen back to d3. I'm not sure why. Because usually you don't want to spend two moves moving a piece back and forth, unless by doing so, you compromise some other piece. Let's see now. Pawn to b5 for is for Vasil. Computer thinks the best. This has one problem, at least temporarily. It blocks the bishop on a6. And the c4 pawn is not pinned any longer. You don't want to block your bishops and rooks with your own pieces, but if you look further, you might see it has an advantage. And let's see, how does before we continue, let's say that we've completed the first 15 moves, and Maxim with white pieces has an advantage of 0.18, a very small one, less than before. But let's see how the game will continue. Maxim is going to take the pawn on b5. Computer thinks it's good, but would rather have the c pawn take. Of course, perhaps Maxim was thinking of winning the pawn on a5, because now this is a free pawn. Not sure how exactly. Black can only protect. First of all, black must take the pawn back. And if he takes the c pawn, if he takes the knight, of course, he loses the knight. If he takes the pawn, then the a5 pawn is not protected. But let's see what Vasil will do now. He uses his c pawn to take on b5, and the computer thinks that this is a mistake and gives 0.99 advantage for Maxim, the highest advantage he ever had. But as you see here, this is true only if he plays the top move. Any other move, we are going to the negatives, meaning Vasily will have advantage, and it's not an easy move to find it. Of course, here you can see it, but in the game it was not easy to find it. And Maxim grabs the pawn on d5. And this is a brilliant move. The only move that would keep the advantage to Maxim, and this is a move where you have to sacrifice your knight. And it's not obvious at all why this is the best possible move. Here the computer says how the game should continue, and for a few moves it's going to continue like that. But as you can see, the best move now for Vasil is to accept the sacrifice. Anything else will make Vasil's deficit even larger. And is Vasil going to grab the knight? Yes, he does. And now there is an only move for Maxim, but easy to spot. The pawn takes on d5. And what you're going to see is that thanks to the pawn that went to b5, the queen on this pawn was not pinned, so the queen on d3 will not be lost. Pawn moving to b4 and attacking the queen is only the fifth possible choice for according to the computer. And of course, the bishop is protected by the knight on c7. So this is an option, but only the fifth best according to the computer. But what is Vasily going to do? He's going to play what the computer thinks is the top choice. Bishop goes to b4, the best move. And now look at the situation. After Maxim sacrificed his knight for 2 pawns. That's why Vasil has an advantage materially of +1. But look at the 2 pawns. You have the d5 pawn is a passed pawn, meaning no pawns on c and d files to stop it. It is protected, although that's not a passed pawn, protected by another pawn on e5 if it moves. Currently, it is only protected by the bishop on g2 and attacked by the knight on c7. If it goes to d6, it's protected by the pawn on e5, which is protected by the pawn on d4, which is protected by the bishop on b2. So Maxim has for now a nice coordination. If he can keep it, he might even be able to promote, or at least threaten to promote a pawn, and prove why his move was brilliant. And let's see how Maxim is going to continue. He plays the best move upon the computer. Pawn goes to d6. And now, how will Vasil reply? His knight on e7 is under attack. He must go somewhere. Where can it go? Definitely don't want it to a8. It's at the corner. You don't want to d5. It's going to be lost by the bishop on g2. It has two reasonable choices, the knight to go to e8 or to e6, the two top choices of the computer, and Vasil will choose the second best choice, going to e6. You'd rather not have the knight at the 8th rank most of the times. Perhaps this was not one of the most times. Knight to f1 for Maxim, and he has queen and rook on the same file contacting each other. And bishop to b7 for Vasil, who is trying to exchange the two light colored bishops. We completed the first 20 moves, and after this spectacular sacrifice, Maxim is leading by 1.09, as we see here. Still, this is nice to have advantage, give you good chances, but far from winning the game. Let's see what's going to happen. Bishop to b7. So Maxim says you want to exchange bishops? Fine, let's exchange them. And now knight goes to e3. You want the knight to start advancing and be as near the opponent's king as possible. Knight to b6 for Vasil, that thinks more or less along the same lines. And now, but the knight going to b6, even though the computer thinks the best, gives the chances for Maxim to gain one more point, even though that is the fourth best move according to the computer, with the pawn on b5. And now Maxim has won 3 points for the knight. That's why materially the two players are the same point, but the passed pawn on d6, protected by the pawn on e5, protected by the pawn on f4, protected by both the bishop on b2 and the rook on d1, give white very good chances because these pawns are worth more than just one pawn at the starting position. Queen to b8 for Vasil. who is threatening if this knight, computer thinks a mistake, but there is a threat. If the knight on b6 moves and goes anywhere where it can attack something else, anywhere, of course, that it cannot be captured by the white queen, then the white queen is under threat. Maybe that is what Vasil was thinking. Let's see how we continue. Knight to f5 for Maxim. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy, but a knight on f5 is a great square to have. Most of the times, quite a lot. What is Maxim thinking? If he can place his queen first on e2, then on g4, and then somehow get rid of this knight on e6, we're talking about checkmate on a g7. So it's a long-term plan. Of course, Vasil, there are many moves. Vasil can easily stop it, perhaps. Let's see what is he going to do. First of all, rook to e8. Mistakes as a computer. Computer would have anything that would stop white's plan. Maxim is going to occupy the open c file, placing the rook on c1. On the c file, there are no black or white pawns. In fact, other than the rook on c1, there is no other piece. So the white rook on c1 has complete control of all the 8 squares of the c file. You love to have such rooks in the game, or similarly bishops controlling entire diagonals and so on. Knight to d7 for Vasil. Now the queen on b5 is threatened. And at this point, we completed the first 25 moves. And after a few mistakes by Maxim, not my mistake, by Vasil, I'm sorry, Maxim's advantage has advanced to 2.45. Now it really becomes being significant. But first of all, Maxim needs to move his queen and not lose it. And if you see in the computer, all 5 top moves for white are moving the queen away to safety. And that is what Maxim is going to do. Move his queen to e2. And Vasil will place his knight back to b6. I would say in Nagras, it's a little bit of waste placing your knight back and forth to the same square. Pawn to d5 for Maxim, and the purpose of this move is very clear. Ensure that the knight on e6 goes somewhere else. It doesn't matter where, so long as it does not control the gf square, so the queen can go there and threaten with mate. Clearly, the knight on b6 cannot take the pawn on d5 because then the rook will take the knight. Although that perhaps could have been the smaller evil, but let's see. Knight goes to c5 now. And queen goes to g4 and is going to checkmate. The plan that we mentioned before. If you see here the computer, there are only 4 moves of white that are going to stop the checkmate. Knight to e6, you're going to see is one choice, but you're going to lose your knight. Even though the computer would rather have the pawn go to d7 before taking the knight. Pawn to g6. Of course, the knight can go to h6 with a check then and win at least a pawn. Pawn to f6. Then you have the rook on b7 as controlling the 7th rank. Then pawn takes on f6, you want your pawn, king is go to h7, and the pawn becomes very powerful. It is going to be lost in the end, but it's not easy. How can it be lost? It will stay for a few moves, and it's very powerful because the threat, as I say, sometimes is mightier than execution. The other choice is pawn to g5 and blocks the g file, so the queen cannot go immediately to g7, but then the knight can go on h6, and then no matter what happens is the queen is going to go to g5. These 4 moves will stop the immediate mate, but all of them will give Maxim an advantage of at least 5.84, you see here. But instead, Vasil plays a move that is not among these top 4, is not even the 5th move. Here, he grabs the pawn on b3. And what is the result? It's an easy checkmate for Maxim, queen to g7, checkmate. It's rare that in such high-level games they end in checkmate. Usually the player behind will resign quite before that. You saw in the previous game. But now this game went all the way to checkmate. Maxim, congratulations for winning against such a tough opponent in such a crucial game and for the third place that you got at the championship. Vasil, clearly it is great that at that age you're continuing both competing and sometimes with great results, not always, but many times great results. And also thanks for the column in the Europe Check magazine, The Imagination in Chess. And I really read it every time, every month. But let's go now to the review. Let's see what does the computer have to say about the game. So we have Maxim Rodhstein has played very well, spectacularly. If the top moves of the computer are the ones that are brilliant, great, or book. And there are 1, 2, plus 1, 2, plus 13, 15, plus 6, 21. 21 out of 29 moves, almost the 3/4 of Maxim, were top engine moves. Let's see how did we do player by player in every category. One brilliant and one great move for Maxim Rodhstein, and best moves. And of course, these two moves, although they're the best, they are not included in this count. Another 13 moves of Maxim Rodhstein were the best moves, while Vasil Ivanchuk had 10 best moves. Excellent 4 for each player, good moves 1 for each player. Book moves. The rare occasion where black had more book moves than white. 6 for Maxim and 7 for Vasil, and this happened because the first 6 moves were all of them book, and then in the 8th move, after Vasil's move, we reached a book position. Inaccuracies, 2 for each of them, 3 mistakes for Vasil, and 1 miss for each of them. This concludes the review of the game that was suggested to me by my Facebook friend Maxim Rodhstein. Maxim, thank you very much for your suggestion. And let's go back to tournaments to see what's happening. The one that I'm hosting, the grecochess, and the one that my subscriber is hosting, the Moonlight Underwater. Grecochess, nothing changed. 9 games to complete the first round. 6 of them, we're still waiting for the hunting achievements to play his first move. He's using his vacation time. Let's see if he will participate. And Underwater Moonlight, the 9 Moons tournament, we reached a point where we have more than half of the games of the first round being completed. 365 completed, 283 remain. And if we go group by group, we'll see that some people are ahead. In Group 1, Lotus Time Chess has 10.5 points. He has 1 draw. No player is without losses. Meaning without loss of even half of a point. Group 2, Spider 99 is ahead with 10 points. And once again, every player has lost at least 1 point. Group 3, my subscriber Zanilor, who is hosting the tournament, is leading with 10 points. And Maxim Govorokha, yes, a participant in my grecochess tournament that has had 4 wins in grecochess, also has 4 wins in the Moonlight Underwater, but his 4 wins are against players that either withdrew or timed out. Group 4, Iraq Lion from Egypt is leading with, and also Rishi Raj 3 from India are leading with 5 points, but Iraq Lion has 5 points in 5 games, while Rishi Raj has 5 wins and 3 losses. Who else? Vivalad Divya from India has 3 wins, 3 points. Isaac the King, Aaron Aitmea have 2 wins in 2 games, but the 2 wins are against the player that has timed out. I'm also mentioning the players that have not lost even half of a point now. Group 5 from Indonesia. A, AMMT has 9 wins in 9 games. Sinan Fu from Greenland has 8 wins in 8 games. Peon Perez had his first loss. Master Excalibur from, I think it is Scotland, has 7 wins in 7 games. Big Poet from Ireland has 6 wins in 6 games. Of course, this is because no, he also has. I'm sorry, he has 6 wins and 1 loss. So without losing points, it's only AMMT from Indonesia and Sinan Fu from Greenland and Master Excalibur from Scotland. These 3 players have not lost even half of a point. Group 6. Munja 44 from Croatia is ahead with 10 points, but Mathis B 2008 from France, 9 wins in 9 games, and David 8 from Brazil has 5 wins in 5 games. Group 7, what's happening? Gandalf 66 from Uzbekistan, 11 wins in 11 games. And who else has not lost a single point? Tragis from Brazil, 8 wins in 8 games. And Mobis from Nigeria has 4 wins in 4 games. Group 8, my own group. The only one that has not lost a single point is Pedoni X from Italy that has just won 1 game. Ahead is Khaled Kadab from Egypt with 4 points and 4 wins, 1 loss. I'm tied with 4 points, but I have 4 wins and 5 losses. And finally, Group 9, Hikaru Carlson Talf from India, a wonderful um, username that combines the last names of 3 of the greatest players of all times. He has 10 winning 10 games ahead. Who else has not lost anything? Lessa 4101 from Brazil has 3 wins, 3 games. Lua 000, I think it's from Spain, has 3 wins, 3 games. But there is a lot more to come. From every group, the top 3 advance. The second round will have 27 players in 3 groups of 9, and 3 top players will go to the final with 9 players. And that's it for now for the game of Maxim Rodhstein against Vasil Ivanchuk. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks to the subscribers, to the viewers, to the likes, and to the encouraging comments. We'll be with the next video with one more of my Facebook friends. For now, ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.